Hello and welcome to John's Football Lockdown. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is John Warrington. I am a sports producer, writer and journalist specialising mainly in football. I've had a fantastic career in and around football, made some fantastic friends, and so I've decided in this time of national crisis, world crisis, to speak to some of those friends about their careers in the game, also to administrators and to football fans as well. In this first edition, I'm speaking to the former Chelsea captain. He also played for Sunderland, Queen's Park Rangers and Fulham, Clive Walker, and joining me, probably my bestest friend in sports broadcasting, the brilliant Jonny Gould.
Clive, I hope you're staying fit and healthy in these troubling times. First of all, there's been a lot of controversy about some clubs, not all, following their staff during this crisis. Has to be said, Chelsea are one of those that haven't, and in fact Roman Abramovich has even handed over the hotel at Stamford Bridge to NHS staff.
Well, I think in this day and age we're now learning very, very quickly that everybody should be looking after everybody else, and there shouldn't be too many people thinking that this is just for certain bands of people like the elite or whatever. And I think Abramovich, we know, and football clubs we know, will try and do things the best way they can. Sometimes though you do feel that football clubs need to be pushed as opposed to making the first effort. And I think we have to take our hat off to Roman and Chelsea Football Club for what they've done.
Yep, absolutely. Now, you know how difficult it is for me to talk about Chelsea being a United fan. Though I have to say, what's the aggregate score this year, Clive? 8-1 to United?
Yeah, well, I think we have to look at the league position as well at the moment, John, and understand there's still a bit to play for.
Listen, I understand that, but also, let's be honest, league tables don't finish in March, they finish in May or June or July or August, whenever this season is going to end. Anyway, let's move on. Chelsea, change of management. Were you surprised when the club gave the job to Frank Lampard?
Not at the end, I wasn't surprised. I thought initially when I first heard it, I thought the club are making a bit of a gamble. It's something probably they've not done before. They've played safe with experienced managers, which you can understand. I suppose the inevitable was going to happen when it eventually came down to it, because Frank seemed to be the perfect fit in. Whether he had that experience to see him through, we'll only know in time. But I think what we can honestly say, and from a Chelsea fan's perspective, the job he's done is probably better than most will have thought prior to him getting the job. So I think from his point of view, he's done an excellent job, and the decision the club made was the correct one.
Obviously, Chelsea were banned for a couple of transfer windows. Do you think that had any bearing on the decision of the board to give the job to Frank Lampard, and maybe they didn't think as a result it was the time to maybe look for a more experienced manager?
No, I'm not sure that actually did have much of a bearing. I suppose it's in the back of their minds, but I think this was a situation that developed, and because of the transfer embargo, I suppose someone who maybe knew the younger players at Chelsea, to be able to bring them through was a plus. I think Frank, when he left the football club, was always going to be in a position to come back, and I just think this forced the club's hands in some ways. They were going to bring him back, but it just made him come back a bit sooner. And as I say, what we've seen up until this point of the season is a man who has given the young players that confidence to prove their ability. And I think the lads, as young players, need to be given that chance, but they have to take it as well, and they've certainly done that.
It's certainly not something we've seen from Chelsea for a good few years now, Clive. And that's the club promoting their younger players. And you look at the likes of Tammy Abraham and Mason Mount coming through and doing really, really well. Do you think this marks a change in policy at the club, and do you think it's going to help the long-term development of your football club?
Yeah, I hope so. And I think when you get an embargo, you have to deal with it accordingly. You have to make decisions to be able to get a team out on the pitch that's going to win matches, and you have to have that confidence, especially with youngsters. And was it in '92 they said you can't win anything with youngsters?
96, yeah, 96.
96. Okay, so
95, 96, yeah.
yeah, and I think that's been proven again with Chelsea at the moment. You can improve the quality of what you're seeing on the pitch, and I think these youngsters have brought something to the playing staff, that enjoyment, that vibrancy, that desire to run forever and ever and ever, to try and get results. And I think they've got results. Yes, there's been some faults along the way, which is what you get from youngsters. But I think at this point you have to give a pat on the back to some of the older players as well, the likes of Azpilicueta, the likes of Willian, people like that who've had to stand up and be counted as well. And I think they've certainly added to it.
Now, I know you're still around Chelsea. You work for Chelsea TV. What's Frank's management style like? Is he one of those that gives a pat on the back, or is he a bit more of a disciplinarian?
I think when we talk about the word disciplinarian, we think of Alex Ferguson, don't we, of course, and many managers that have gone in the past. And I think the era of football has changed yet again. We often say it changes every 2 or 3 years, but I think there's definitely a mentality that to give someone a pat on the back, an arm around the shoulder, is more the mentality of the modern day manager. And I think Frank certainly fits into that character. I think also he can have that stern look upon his face when, I think as a player, you realise without Frank raising his voice, it's just that look in the eye. And I think there has been some very famous managers over the years that give you that look. Probably Bill Shankly maybe was one of them. Alex Ferguson certainly. If there's a look in his eye, you actually know, that you don't go wrong again. You've done something bad and you need to put it right. And maybe Frank has got that about him as well.
No, because there was something in the papers earlier this season about we've all been in dressing rooms and we've all had lists of fines if you turn up late for training, this, that, and the other. But some of them looked incredibly high fines. I know players are paid a lot in this day and age, but some of them missing training. I was like, it made my eyes water at the thought of having to pay a fine like that.
Well, you can imagine in our day, if you got fined 50 quid, that was a high fine as well. So whatever they get fined, I don't think there can be any excuses. I think also any fine introduces discipline, and I think discipline within a football club is very necessary. My point would be was where do the fines go? Back in our day, it went to a party at the end of the season, but I think it's important it now goes to the right places. And we can all talk about, of course, the NHS and people like that who are desperately in need. So if the fine comes about nowadays, for me, that's where it should be going.
Here to that, definitely. Now, there is a seemingly a little bit of a trend of clubs appointing ex-players as managers. United with Ollie, and then more recently, Arsenal have appointed Mikel Arteta. Why do you think clubs are looking at that route, choosing that route?
I think it's a one where we often look at, when you say clubs, it's the three you pointed out there, probably 3 of the top 6. So at the moment, it's not filtered further down the leagues, but I think it needs to. And I think, we've said for years, and I'm talking 10, 15 years, about championship managers who've played the game, who've worked lower down, who've worked their way up to the championship, but never be given the opportunity. And I think it's now, maybe we're seeing, if the likes of Arsenal, Chelsea, Man United are successful and do better than the likes of Manchester City, should we say, and Liverpool at the moment, then that's when you'll see the owners. And it is on them as well, to be fair, to start to give these very, very good British managers or managers who've worked their way through the system to be given that chance. And ex-players are perfect for that if they're given the right chance. But they need to have the right mentality, and I think that mentality is standing out now.
You mentioned Liverpool there. There's another conversation going on in football. What do you think should happen to the football season now? Do you think it should be voided and the whole, the season's results just wiped out? Do you think that they should, or do you think they should not start a new round of competition, i.e. next season, until this one is finished? Or do you think if they do stop it now, teams in the current promotion or title winning positions and relegation positions, do you think that should be the way they do things?
I'm of the thought process that somehow we should finish the season, albeit if it has to be behind closed doors, albeit if players have to play every 3 days. I think everybody would be then in the same boat, and I think that's probably, for me, the best way to see it through. When that starts is probably the issue. Can we fit it in and roll on another season after that, with obviously big competitions, the European Championships, the World Cup coming up, all those scenarios will have to be squashed in. But if everybody's in the same position, I don't see the problem, as long as we can resolve this coronavirus, that no one else gets infected. And I think that's the most important thing, is the health of everybody. But I think I would like to see the season continue. I'd like to see through to the end. If that means playing behind closed doors and Liverpool winning the league, I'll have to accept that. I think also if it means Chelsea staying in the top four, then that has to be accepted as well. But relegation and promotion are difficult aspects if you don't finish a season. I think we would look back in many, many years' time and say that if we just call it null and void, then I think that would be an absolute disaster for football and what it presents. So if we can finish it, whether it means running it late, squeezing everything in, maybe getting rid of the League Cup as it is, maybe not having that for one season might be an option. So I would like to see its way through if possible. And I'm sure the powers that be are working on that.
And I'm sure most of us would agree with that, Clive. And a final question on the subject of football management. I got to know you really well when you were managing a non-league and at clubs like Molesey, and I know how. And I've been a non-league manager myself. And I know how difficult running a non-league football club is. It's a different set of problems to maybe a Premier League manager. And you're dealing with chairmen who've got 10-year plans, it seems, to win the blooming Champions League from ridiculously low positions.
Yeah, they got egos, John.
But do you regret that you never got the opportunity to manage higher up? Or I remember you once saying to me that perhaps, and as much as you love playing, and you still play to a really good level, even into your 40s, do you regret not finishing playing earlier and going into management instead?
When I look back at what I achieved playing wise, I have absolutely no regrets retiring at 42 years of age. I absolutely loved my time playing for Woking and Cheltenham, of course winning things as well. But it just seemed at that time it was the right time to finish. And I think your body, my body anyway, started to tell me and give me signs that enough was enough. So playing wise, I don't regret finishing at the time I did. I'm glad I didn't finish any earlier. Management wise, the strange thing was that I moved into management at Molesey and absolutely loved being on the other side. It was difficult, and it was difficult to understand that maybe the knowledge I had in my head, getting that over to players without being disrespectful at that level of football was probably very, very difficult for them to understand. And I was in a hurry. I wanted to move on quickly, and that was the reason why maybe I didn't move in to football management and coaching on that side. And I think the TV opportunity came along at that particular time, and commentating and punditry. So I think I started to enjoy punditry. I mean, I worked for you, John, and we did lots of work together. So from that aspect, working for Sky as well, it was a marvellous opportunity. And now I find myself working for Chelsea TV for what is now the last 10 years. So it's all been a fabulous time, great career. But I've also had a second career for the last 20 years, talking about what I played and trying to get my thoughts over to people in that way.
Clive, no regrets. I love that. Okay, let's welcome Clive Walker back to Football Lockdown, and also another guest, probably my bestest friend in sports broadcasting, the one and only Jonny Gould. Jonny, welcome.
Hi, John. It's a pleasure to be with two pals here, Clive and yourself. Locked down as we are, observing the guidelines.
Jonny, I know you've got an extensive career in sports broadcasting, and you told me a lovely story about Clive in your early days as a reporter and confusing him with another player with similar looks.
It's a very, very long time ago. It's when footballers had shirts 1 to 11, which is a lovely thing, because I always remember managers sometimes chucked the left back in the number 9 shirt in a silly attempt to try and confuse the opposition manager, who, if they hadn't done their homework, would have seen that immediately. But Clive, it's lovely to meet you online, at least. I have the privilege in my career to have seen you play, but you played with someone who looked rather like you from the press box where I was at Fulham, at least 60 feet away from you. You looked a bit like Gavin Nebling, who...
Really?
A little bit. You had a similar haircut at the time. And I remember writing home to my my radio station saying, "Oh, there's a very impressive midfielder called Gavin Nebling who seems to be controlling the game." And then I realised about 25 minutes in, earwigging the reporter from BBC London, that in fact it was you, Clive.
Well, Gavin was about 6'2", so he was a bit taller than me. But thanks.
Yeah, well, the thing about you, Clive, is that I always thought, and I watched, what I was very lucky about doing in my early career as a reporter was I watched football right from the First Division, which is now, of course, the Premier League, right down to League Division 4. And this Fulham v Shrewsbury game that I remember was, in fact, a championship game. It was Division 2. And Fulham had found their way into Division 2 through a succession of promotions at the time. And Shrewsbury Town were a side who'd spent quite a lot of time in what is now the Championship. And I always thought that, because I knew you were a First Division player in the 1970s and early 80s, I thought that you were still good enough at that time to play in the top flight. But it was at Fulham towards the sort of end of your career.
Yeah, I mean, I went to Fulham. Basically, I was at Queen's Park Rangers. I landed at Queen's Park Rangers and didn't really get to play many games. And of course, the plastic pitch didn't help. And I would say, desperate to get out of there. But I was dying to move on just to play football. And at the time, Ray Lewington, of course, a friend of mine from the Chelsea days, was the manager, and he'd been trying for a while to get me out of Queen's Park Rangers, and it was very difficult. But eventually I did manage to leave and sort of get my career going again, because it stuttered a bit at Queen's Park Rangers. So I suppose, yeah, I was 30 years of age. I still felt I had the ability. I was still quick enough to get around the pitch, and felt perhaps that, you know, I could continue playing. So it was a good fit in for me.
Now, you're one of a rather unique group of players who did the West London treble. Let's keep Brentford out of this just for one moment. But okay. You played for Chelsea, Queen's Park Rangers, and Fulham, which, you know, there isn't quite the same rivalry, is there, as perhaps you might get between Newcastle and Sunderland, between Villa and Birmingham, Rangers and Celtic? Or is there?
There's an edge. And I think the edge is with the fans. I don't think it's with the players.
Yeah.
I don't think it ever was. I don't think it is today. But I think there's an edge with the fans. I think Chelsea have always been the bigger of the three clubs. I think they still are. I don't think that's changed. Even with Fulham getting into the Premier League, QPR again, you know, and bouncing back out again. You know, it's been Chelsea all the way in that respect. But I think every time that they come to play against each other, there's certainly, from a Fulham perspective, the Fulham fans love to beat Chelsea. I think the QPR fans love to beat Chelsea, but I don't think the feeling is mutual in the other direction. So I think Chelsea just always feel they're probably, I wouldn't have said above, but feel that they're better than the other two. But you know, that's a dodgy way to travel.
Clive, when you were with Fulham and QPR, did you ever play against Chelsea? And if so, you say that there's still an edge. But how did the Chelsea fans feel about you playing for one of your two, certainly geographical rivals?
I think the strange thing is, and my answer would be that the only time I vaguely remember is perhaps playing against Chelsea for QPR. I didn't for Fulham, obviously we were in a league below, but I played against Chelsea for QPR, I think just the once, but I can't even remember the score. I think it was a big score. So we won't go back there. But not for Fulham. But I think one thing that did surprise me, and we did when after I'd retired, and I did a walk round Chelsea pitch just before Chelsea played Fulham. And I got a bigger cheer from the Fulham fans than I did from the Chelsea fans. So the memory, I guess, was still there from playing for Fulham, which was really nice, and really appreciated that.
But Clive, I want to ask you a question. It was leading on from the Chelsea Queen's Park Rangers Fulham triangle. There's another very eminent, probably the most eminent of players that had played in that triangle of West London that we commemorated just a couple of days ago, his passing 2 years ago. The great Ray Wilkins, who served Chelsea and Queen's Park Rangers in his latter years with great distinction. I remember being at a midweek game that QPR played against Liverpool, and class is permanent. Age 35, he half-volleyed the ball into the net from about 30 yards. And this was a Liverpool side with Ian Rush and managed by Graham Souness, and it was still a very, very good side. Even Nigel Clough was in that Liverpool side that night. I just really want a few words to you about how much we miss Ray. He was one of my best friends in football, and I was always struck by his humility, about his lack of victimhood, about everything that had happened to him in football after he'd retired from the game. He got jobs as a coach. He was sacked. He was even at Villa for a short while, and he was a manager of Jordan for a while. He had an extraordinary career. But the way he was, kicked out of Chelsea at half-time in a youth match, that sort of lives with me. And he deserved a whole lot better, I think, with his coaching career, because there was a player who deserved so much more, I think, as a coach.
Yeah, I think I started playing with Ray when I was 14 for Chelsea in the what was the youth system in those days, and I'm fortunate to play with him for England schoolboys. And I think at the age of 16 I realised that this lad as a player was by far and away better than everybody else for his age, and I can understand why Chelsea made him captain at 18, and he went on to obviously play some great games for Manchester United as well, and plus the European teams as well that he played for. I think the one thing that he did in management, everybody you speak to will say, what a gentleman, what a nice guy. And when you talk about managers in those days, being a nice guy didn't always work. I think more when you talk about managers now and probably ongoing, it would have been a better place for him to come into. So maybe as a manager, timing was not the best for him. But he continued to work within football clubs throughout his life. Certainly missed. I saw him 3 weeks before he passed, and I think to not see him in Chelsea Football Club, as I often did in the press room over the last few years, was disappointing to know what happened. Not only a great player, lovely character, gentleman for sure. And maybe being a gentleman probably didn't do him any favours in management, but he loved being involved. He loved Chelsea Football Club, and just wanted to be in and around people who enjoyed football.
Rest in peace, Ray Wilkins. John, I want to say one thing to you, to pass the ball to you, so to speak. Maybe his high point was that amazing left foot strike at Wembley for Manchester United in the cup final.
Absolutely, it was a 2-2 draw, and I was with the United fans that day. But yeah, what a goal! But you talked about Ray being going to Europe. He was one of the pioneers of English footballers going to Europe. I know there'd been, two or three in the early 60s, and then Liam Brady had gone, I think it was in the late 70s, early 80s. But he, Trevor Francis, and Ray Wilkins was superb wherever he went. But I just have to say, echo everything you say about what a gentleman he was. And I know he was a massive help in the early days, like you were, Clive, of Masters Football. And Ray absolutely got behind that. Such a lovely man. And I last time I saw him was about a month before he passed away. I went into Sky Sports News with Jamie Lawrence on something else, and Ray was in there, and he'd give a wave and thumbs up, how are you?
Yeah.
And that was the last time I saw him. And sometimes in life you hear that somebody has passed, and it registers a shock on the Richter scale. And when the news came through about Ray Wilkins, it was absolutely terrible. And as you say, rest in peace, Ray.
I had the good fortune, and this is where the career of media and football merges, to actually be a teammate of his at quite close quarters for quite a long time as the presenter of ITV's Football First. He was one of my regular pundits, and some of the best discussions we had were in commercial breaks. I asked him about his brother Graham and his other brother Dean, and we talked about him being, the best of those players, but they all succeeded as professional footballers. But he also reminded me that his father George was a player during the war period at Brentford. Yeah. And he comes from a football family, and I was also chairing a panel. The first time I ever met him was in the early 90s, where I was hosting a charity panel, and I said to him, Chelsea, Manchester United, AC Milan, Rangers, Queen's Park Rangers, etc., even in Hibernian and Coventry right at the end of his career. You might have earned, 75 grand a year in those days, or maybe even 100 grand a year at AC Milan, but do you regret not playing 25 years on and ending up with millions of pounds as a footballer in this day? And he said this, and I was struck by his humility from that point on. Not at all, he said. Not at all. In that gentle way that he spoke. I had my time in football. I enjoyed every minute, and I don't begrudge the millions of pounds paying for the players. And in fact, it was a more wholesome sort of period. There was less protection, and of course he was a senior player by that time. I'm forgetting Paris Saint-Germain as well. This guy played for the blue ribboned clubs.
He did, yeah.
All European champions, and he even went on to coach at Aston Villa, another European champion. I'll get that in as well.
Well, you talk about the family. I knew his dad, George. I went to his funeral. I actually knew the family, the whole family. Obviously there's two sisters as well, two older sisters. There's actually four brothers. There was Steve as well, who was in the reserves at Chelsea, never made it as a footballer at that level, but there was four of them, and I played with all of them. Dean I played with at Brighton, and Graham of course I played with at Chelsea as well. So I actually knew the whole family, the mum, everybody. They're smashing family. And when you've known them all since you were about 14 years of age, someone like that who when it's a shock when someone passes is certainly hurtful. But you're right in what you say, Johnny. Everybody, you talk about him as a person first and foremost, but you talk about someone who has a career, the career, the teams he played for, the enjoyment he had as well. Talking about it similarly to what I do in what I do, in the respect that you go into studios and be a pundit and give your opinions. Some ways you go into coaching as well and you give your advice. His whole life was immersed in football in some way, shape or form. So yeah, sad day when things like that happen.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for giving up some of your Monday morning for me. Now, busy schedules and diaries. I know we're all...
What do you think we were doing, John?
I know. You're probably all dressed up, ready to go out on the town, aren't you?
Breaking the lockdown. According to Matt Hancock, the health secretary, but, I can tell you, go out for essential shopping and keep doing podcasts. John. It'll keep
And-
you sane.
But keep us all sane. But you're absolutely right, because I'm finding I'm putting my makeup on for my weekly trip to Tesco. You know, it's the highlight of my week.
You
Listen,
used to put that on every day of the week, John, didn't you?
Yeah, well,
Your makeup.
He's got to have an excuse for it now.
No, it was Clive who lent me the makeup bag in the first place. So there you go. Anyway, listen, guys, it's been an absolute pleasure and certainly a lot of fun talking to you both, highlighting some and going back down memory lane. It's been absolutely fantastic, guys. Thank you so much indeed. Everybody, Jonny Gould and Clive Walker, two of the nicest men involved with football.
Thanks, John.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you, John.
Cheers, Johnny.